Welcome into the Otson Audibles podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on the show, getting you ready on this Friday, this smoky Friday in Eugene. The east winds have brought in some smoke from fires around the area, and it could impact things on Saturday too. So that's something to monitor. The game should still play out, but it is smoky in Eugene. The smokes have come back to Eugene. Oregon takes on Eastern Washington for its home opener, fellas. Week 2 of the season, 5:30 kick at Autzen. Pac-12 networks are on the call. These two teams have played just once in its series history. That was a 61-42 victory by the Ducks on September 5th, 2015. The debut of Vernon Adams against his former team. Cooper Kupp had that historic game in Autzen Stadium, who was coached by current Oregon receivers coach Junior Adams. A lot of connections here between the two programs. Excited to get back into Autzen for one. Excited to see how this team kind of rebounds from week 1's 49-3 loss to Georgia. And we'll talk more about how do we define just a successful game for Oregon here later on the show. But I'm just excited to get back into Autzen and just kind of see what this atmosphere is going to be like, because last week I think took a huge whimper out of the sails of Oregon's fan base.
Yeah, you felt that this week, didn't you? Just reading the message board, seeing reactions on social media to any story that has anything to do with the program. Yeah, people aren't in very good moods. People have lost a lot of optimism, and I get why. Obviously, I'm not saying they shouldn't feel that way. I understand it. It's understandable when you get absolutely boat raced on national television. It doesn't sit well. But as Sam Taimani said, I guess Taki Taimani, no Sam, that's off of the official roster. So I'll stick with that. But as Taki said, as Casey Rogers said, as a couple of players said this week, there is a lot to prove. There's a lot to show that they think they're a much better team than what they put on the field last weekend. And I tend to agree, or hopefully I agree. I don't know, because we've seen so little, but I guess I would be really surprised if ultimately a 49-3 loss to Georgia is going to be indicative of how the whole season plays out, and it's just going to be a disaster. So I don't anticipate that's the case. I think we'll see some pretty positive things. Eastern Washington is a very good FCS team. They're ranked 11th in the FCS poll right now. This is a team that had the equivalent of the Heisman Trophy winner on their roster a year ago, the number 1 ranked offense nationally at the FCS level. A year ago, they made the second round of the FCS playoffs. This is a team with a lot of optimism. I should note that player, the Walter Payton Award winner, Eric Barrier, is no longer with the team. He's been replaced by Gunnar Talkington. Just so Eastern Washington talk up front, because I wasn't on the podcast earlier this week. Been sick, which has been a real bummer. Braving it for this one, coming off the IR, I guess, if you will, to try to make this podcast work. I've got like a couple teas and sort of things around me here to make sure I don't cough too much, but wanted to give a little like Eastern Washington insight, because I don't think we've talked much about it on the podcast from what I've seen from you guys. But this is a team that has offensively the ability to challenge Oregon a little bit, especially where Oregon isn't strong, which is in its secondary. So I think it'll be interesting, because I kind of think about it like Oregon's strength is running the football, or we think that is the case right now. Well, Eastern Washington gave up like 300 yards to Tennessee State, and their leading rusher had 207 yards, I think. So be aware of the fact that Oregon should be able to run the football. But on the inverse is also true, where Talkington threw for like 350 yards, 5 touchdowns against Tennessee State in its opener. That's an offense that averaged 44 pass attempts per game last year. The quarterback had 5,000 yards passing in a 13-game season last year. So very, very productive pass offense. They are going to throw the football. And Oregon had a really hard time doing much against Georgia at all in that regard last game. So I think, yes, I do think there's an opportunity for Oregon to blow this game out. Yes, Oregon is more talented, but this is a pretty prideful Eastern Washington team, and I don't expect them to just roll over this. There are significantly worse FCS teams than this one. This is one of the better teams that you could schedule from the FCS level. I expect Oregon to win. We'll get to score predictions and all that, but you'd like to see Oregon win decisively. If this game is close in the second half, you'll be disappointed. At the same time, if this game is close in the second half, don't say I didn't kind of like, I don't want to say warn you, but provide you some information for why that could be the case, because this is a team that's pretty prideful.
Yeah, I mean, Erik, you highlighted it, but this is a good FCS squad. They really are. I watched most of the Eastern Washington and Tennessee State game. I think Tennessee State probably would have won if they didn't turn the ball over 4 times. I think that's a big issue. But just some major takeaways is that this is Eastern Washington is a program that's going to throw the ball, like Erik mentioned. It's going to be a lot of dink and dunks. I don't think their offensive line is that great, considering their second leading rusher, who wasn't Talkington, their quarterback, averaged like just over 3 yards a carry. So I think Oregon's defensive line could have an impact there, but I don't think Eastern Washington is going to, sport any plays that are going to allow Oregon's defensive line to make an impact. I think they're going to go dink and dunk out to the perimeter. I think they'll probably take a hand out of Georgia's book. Mm-hmm. And we've been saying for the past week on this podcast that, it was bad that Oregon's defense couldn't really handle the pass, but B, Georgia's athletes were just much better east to west than Oregon's athletes. I think that there's a possibility that we really see if it was just Georgia's athletes that were making the issue, or if it was actually like a schematic issue with Oregon's defense in terms of going east to west. I think that'll be a major highlight of the game. But their defense, like Erik mentioned, Tennessee State ran for almost 300 yards, 289 total, with their leading rusher having over 200 rushing yards. I think that's a place where Oregon's offensive line, with their skill set and their history at Oregon, with how many career games they've all played in now, I think that's a major positive for Oregon. I think that there's Eastern Washington lost a lot in their secondary and their linebackers from last season after a really great run, but I think this will all come down to offensive execution and, once again, tackling. If Oregon could tackle in the open field and not let Eastern Washington get all of these, big chunk plays like they did against Tennessee State, I think that they can easily win this game. But this is, like Erik was mentioned, this is not a pushover opponent. It's very formidable from the FCS level, ranked 11th. This should be a better game than I think people anticipate, but I also can see Oregon blowing them out because of just the pure just out athleticize, I guess, the Eastern Washington front. I don't think that's the right word, and Erik is giving me the stink eye right now. But I think Oregon just has a much better roster in terms of athletes and ability to get along the perimeter. But again, I am very interested to see if against Georgia it was a huge schematical error in Oregon's defense, or it was the Georgia athletes were so much better than Oregon's that they were able to attack the perimeter and go east to west on this defense. So I think that's going to be one of the main highlights I look for.
Well, Jared, you're factually correct by calling Oregon the more talented roster, because Eastern's not even in the blue chip ratio team talent composite ranking.
Nor should they.
Nor should they be.
They do have that sweet red field, though. But that won't matter in Saturday's game.
They're not bringing it with them?
No, they're not.
Well, they brought the red sun that came up this morning, so maybe it's the reign of Eastern Washington's terror on Eugene starting early.
Actually, I lied, Jared. They are actually on the list. You had to click more teams twice to find them. They check in at 165 on the team talent composite rankings, smack in between Montana State and Sacramento State. And Jared also brought up that they maybe should have lost to Tennessee State. Tennessee State has a significantly more talented roster, according to our rankings here. 139th for Tennessee State, the Tigers. They had 2 former 4-star players on their team, 9 3-stars. So that should just give you maybe an idea of where this team is at. And because Erik's right too, this is, even though they're not historically rated high as players at Eastern Washington, they're a proud program and they always do well. So it's going to be interesting to see how Oregon plays against this team and matches up from a schematic standpoint, because talent-wise, Oregon is significantly better. Injury news going into week 2. Ryan Walk still, it looks, I don't know if doubtful is the right word, but we didn't see him at practice the 2 days that we were there. And it is noteworthy. We should mention that players do arrive, do leave, in the time that we're not there. So maybe he was at practice for part of it while we weren't allowed into practice, but I don't want to say yes or no on that. Marcus Harper did take some reps again with the ones than when we were in at practice. Jackson Powers Johnson back on the football field, which is good for the Ducks. He's participating. Caleb Chapman, a receiver who did not suit up for the game against Georgia, he was also back practicing, looking like he's trending in the right direction. And then Jaden Everett, a defensive player that we thought just wasn't here for, 3 weeks? Turns out, like I mentioned, he just shows up when we're not there, and we finally got to see him in practice on Wednesday. We have photo evidence on duckterritory.com that Jaden Everett was at practice, so he's back. So looking like, aside from the Popo Amabe injury and from the Ryan Walk uncertainty status, it's looking like, from a health standpoint at least, Oregon's kind of trending in the right direction.
I think they've been trending in the right direction for a long time after some of their offensive linemen were out for the first few practices. Dan did mention that he expected Ryan Walk to go. I believe that was in his Monday press conference. His knee is dinged up a bit. But, we didn't see him at practice on Tuesday and Wednesday. I would probably be more concerned about his ability to play if he wasn't at practice today, if he didn't do anything, or yesterday probably. But, again, we don't get to see those practices. So if Harper gets the start, and let's say they are just being precautious with Walk, I think that's fine. We saw Harper, who had a very nice interview after Tuesday's practice, mentioned that he hasn't played a real football game or gotten into and making an impact in over 1,000 days, which I thought was wild. But we saw him against Georgia. It's always a good thing with an offensive lineman if you don't know that they're doing a bad thing, because it's pretty usually obvious. So I think Harper is certainly somebody who's going to be fine if he has to start at left guard in place of Ryan Walk. But like you mentioned, Jackson Powers Johnson is back. He traveled to Atlanta, didn't dress, was very active on the sideline in pregame and helping Alex Forsythe, the center. And then, Jaden Everett, we hadn't seen him in 3 or 4 weeks. Apparently he's there now. So that's always a good sign that Oregon gets their guys back. But injury-wise, like you said, Matt, other than Popo Amavai, who had a successful surgery as he announced on Twitter, Oregon has been pretty healthy for the last 2 weeks, I'd say 2 or 3 weeks. Looking to continue that just going into this game.
All right. Let's talk success against Eastern Washington, because in these types of games, FCS versus Power 5, and a Power 5 team that started the year ranked inside the top 15, winning a game by 7 is not really acceptable. Winning a game by 3, you're ecstatic that you win. You never are upset that you won a football game, but there's more there that should have happened. Go back to last year even, and it's not even against an FCS foe. Different coach, I understand that, but a 7-point win against Fresno State week 1 by Oregon left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths before they went and played Ohio State. So the question becomes, how do you define success for Oregon beyond just winning this game? There's no sports line right now. There's no line in this game from Caesars. We haven't seen anything yet. Offshore, I'm going to break rules here. We've seen offshore lines around 20, 21 points. So Oregon's about a 3-score favorite in this game from an offshore account. I don't even know if winning by 21 justifies a successful game for Oregon. Probably, but I don't know about you, but for me, I want to see the defense get a stop, force a punt, in the first half, force a punt in the first quarter. I'd like to see takeaways. Win the takeover battle. That's something that you should be able to do in this type of a game. I think they're going to give up a lot of yards, but what do you do when the field shrinks? It felt like when Oregon played Georgia, they could move the football, but then once they got into that 25, 30-yard line, things got really hard for them to move the football. They ran out of space. Do we see that with Oregon's defense against Eastern? Offensively, defensively, real quick, tackling. What's the yards after catch? What's the yards after contact that we're going to see in this game? That's important. Offensively, for me, it's efficiency, finish drives. That's how I'm going to define success. If they're struggling to finish drives, having to settle for 3 points often, that could be a concern for me moving forward, even if they win this football game. I think this is a hard game to define success for Oregon.
Ultimately, winning is a good start.
Yeah, that's the easiest one.
And I don't think any of us are really skeptical of their ability to do that. Let's put it this way: if they lose this game, this season could get off the rails pretty quickly. Yeah. That's not really on my radar as a possible result, in part because I just think Oregon actually has a lot of good players on its team. And I'm putting trust into this coaching staff to make some adjustments and to push this team in practice this week, right? I mean, again, I was away sick over here. I've got my elixirs and everything next to me because I've just been kind of unable to go watch practice. But I was really thought I was telling the way Dan spoke about Wednesday's practice and just how disappointed he was in some of the things. So I like seeing that. It seems like they're pushing themselves, challenging themselves. It doesn't sound like one of the things that Dan said on Monday was our practices going up against Georgia weren't harder than the game. And I will also say, I think he's not saying they didn't challenge themselves in practice. He's also saying like straight up, like we couldn't simulate what Georgia freaking did. I mean, like we just don't have we don't have the dudes, don't have the dogs to do that. And very few teams in the country do. And that's part of why they were having a Dante Thornton or Noah Whittington, like key parts of their offense, playing scout team roles leading into that game, was to try their best to get it. And obviously it wasn't enough. But in terms of, I guess, just measuring success going into this one, I want to see marked improvements on both sides of the ball in areas that were problematic last week. No turnovers on offense or limiting turnovers. And if the turnovers do happen, they should be effort turnovers, not mental error turnovers. And what I mean by that is a guy battling for the pylon and the ball gets poked out and goes to the end zone. I'll live with that. If it's Bo Nix trying to throw the ball into deep coverage, you wouldn't live with that, Jared?
I'm shaking my head because that's the worst rule in college football.
It is.
It goes through and then it's a touchback.
I hate that. I hate it. Oregon fans have hated that since Cameron Colvin against Cal in 2007, maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure on the year, but that cost them a game that they very likely should have won. And it's cost many teams games. But like yes. I would take that sort of a turnover opposed to you throw it into a tight window kind of needlessly, like we saw happen a couple of times in the opener by Bo Nix.
Right.
I think Bo Nix seeing improved play there, just offensively, is really important. Fans have already turned on him. Fans have already deemed him a failure. They want to see Ty Thompson after one game against the best team in the country. I understand that inclination. I understand fans these days turn on players really, really quickly. And I get it at quarterback. It's the most evident. I think going back and having watched it, I think he played pretty well for the most part in that game and just made a couple of really bad reads. I don't know if there was a whole lot else he could have done the rest of the game, if I'm being completely honest with you, having rewatched it. The two interceptions, I don't agree with. I don't think they were good decisions. The second one in particular was really bad. Mm-hmm. I think he played okay, and I want to see him turn in a really strong showing. I think that's really important for team morale. I think that's really important for the fan base to be able to get behind their quarterback and support him. Because the last thing you want is a repeat of what happened last year against Cal at Autzen, where you're booing your quarterback and asking for the backup to come in. That's the last thing you want. So I think it's really important Bo has a strong game, shows some things, doesn't turn the ball over, makes good decisions, the offense moves, scores some points. Like Matt says, big part finishing drives. And then defensively, getting stops is obviously like the ultimate goal. But I think for me, a big part is just tackling in space better and having your defensive backs perform better. It wasn't awful in coverage all the time against Georgia. The problem was when it was awful, it cost you points and it cost you big plays. And Eastern Washington is going to throw the ball even more frequently than Georgia. And so that going in, you got to be prepared for that. I'll be very curious to see how well Oregon performs in this area, because to me, if you get beat up here again, it's going to become the blueprint. If an FCS team can do what the defending national champions did, teams are going to lock in on that and say Oregon just isn't going to be able to win in this facet of the game all year. So those are areas that I look at. I think Bo Nix in particular is one. He needs to perform better. He needs the fan base to kind of go, okay, I don't expect the entire opinion to change because that Georgia loss is hard to get out of your brain, and it is an FCS opponent. People will downgrade it, but he needs to perform at least B plus level here for the fans to kind of get off his back a little bit and give him some room to cook, because I just think it could get really dangerous if you go into BYU and Washington State conference play and it's like, you got to make a change. Why aren't they making a change? This guy sucks.
Yeah, I think overall, in a very broad sense, you look at what Dan Lanning mentioned as the three biggest issues with teams at the beginning of the season, and missed tackles, penalties, and turnovers. I think Oregon was 1 for 3 because they had fewer penalties than Georgia did. But turnovers and missed tackles were massive against Georgia. So those are just the overall general themes that I'm looking at in terms of, can Bo Nix or any of the running backs, can they control the ball, and can they make open field tackles, which they proved against Georgia that was not happening. Sam Taimani mentioned how often they've been tackling, and he just said that's a lot. And I don't believe him, because I think that's exactly what they should be doing. They need to be working on their tackling and everything like that. More specifically, like Erik mentioned, Bo Nix needs to have a good game in terms of being deemed successful. And it doesn't necessarily mean throwing for 8 million yards. It just means, throwing accurately, making good reads, having a high completion percentage, hitting guys, leading players open, not leading them into defenders, just making good passes like we've seen him do for years. In terms of like a more offense, just getting open as receivers, not a lot of separation against Georgia. And mostly that's because of how good Georgia's defensive backs are and their linebackers are in coverage. So I think they'll have more success there. Defensively, getting somewhat of a pass rush whenever there can be. I know Dan is a big simulated pressures guy. We talk about that a lot on this podcast before, but they need something. Even when Stetson Bennett went back to drop, there were very few plays where Oregon made him uncomfortable. There were plays where he was uncomfortable, but it just wasn't a lot. And also that speaks to the value and the consistency and the talent level of Georgia's offensive line as well. But I think when you go against Eastern Washington, or EWU, as Cooper Kupp called it on Thursday Night Football, which I thought was funny, you need to produce a pass rush, whether that's with your 4 down linemen or whether it's simulated pressures with your linebackers or a nickel, whatever the case may be. The defensive back room just has to show up. And that means either putting themselves into coverage and doing it well, or making open field tackles from the safeties or the cornerbacks. I guess really most of my defensive issues come from tackling. And I think that was the biggest issue against Georgia, as we've all, if you watch the game live or if you rewatched it, those missed tackles in the open field or along the sideline keep coming up. And like Erik said, those go from a 3 to 5 yard gain, which you can live with if you make the first or second tackle, to a 15 to 30 yard gain if you miss your second and third tackles. So it's quick to the ball. Like Dan said, a lot of hats are on the helmet, or a lot of hats are on the ball, just gang tackling, making sure that there's multiple people going at the same direction. I think those are successful ways of winning this game. Like Erik mentioned, I don't have the thought of Oregon losing in my head, just because I think they're just so much more talented. And offensively, I think they can still move the ball. I thought they moved the ball well against Georgia, but like Matt mentioned, once they get into the red zone area where things tighten up, do they have a set of plays? Do they have 10 plays that they can go to and score from the 5 yard line? Or do they have 10 plays that they're confident in can get Oregon into the end zone? I think that's going to be a big thing, but frankly, we'll go to my score predictions eventually, but I don't know how often they're going to be in the red zone. I think they're going to be scoring from other places on the field.
All right, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, let's dive into what Jared just said, those predictions for this football game coming up. All right, welcome back to the Odds and Audibles podcast. Some game picks, all right? We will go offensive team pick, offensive player pick, defensive team pick, defensive player pick, and then we'll end up with the score predictions here. Offensive team pick. I think Oregon's bread and butter in this game is going to be running the football. Eastern had a really hard time stopping it, and against Tennessee State, I think it's the strength of Oregon's offense right now, seeing what they did against Georgia. And so behind a strong running game, Oregon's going to go over 500 yards of total offense in this one. It's going to be fueled by the run game. I wanted to say 300, but that's pretty lofty from a rushing standpoint. So I'm not going to pick a running number, but overall, just 500 yards total offense, and the run game has a really big performance in that.
By the way, I didn't see a listener volunteer to score our predictions from last week, which is just devastating. I mean,
I know.
What are you doing with your time? If you're listening to the podcast, come on, get with it. I don't think we hit very much last week to begin with, so maybe we just don't worry about it. You said it was lofty, Matt, but I'm going with it. 300 yards on the ground. It's funny because I thought that was a pretty lofty prediction. And then there are a couple people in the comment section on my Skopil story, which, by the way, if you're a subscriber at Duck Territory and you read Skopil, those predictions are what I use for the show. I had a couple comments say that's actually not that lofty at all because Eastern Washington just gave up 290 yards last week to Tennessee State, and Tennessee State's an FCS team, and Oregon's a Power 5 team, pretty talented roster. I thought it was pretty bold. I'm sticking with it as being pretty bold. I think it qualifies. Oregon runs for more than 300 yards on the ground. I think has a lot of success. The offensive line, I posted this in my Skopil, and Matt actually came up with the stat. This is the best yards per carry a rush offense had gained against Georgia since Kentucky in 2019. So Oregon's offense on the ground, kind of did some work. And I went back and looked at it from a total yards rushed and gained perspective against Georgia. I know Oregon didn't have a lot of success here, but the 140 yards Oregon gained on the ground, that's the fourth most in 3 years against Georgia. If you go back, this is actually a pretty impressive. And you also think, shoot, the game script flipped so fast where they were hardly trying to establish the run in the second half. They were down 30 points, 40 points. They were throwing it. I think Oregon showed, and its offensive line showed, it can run the ball a little bit. And you kind of go not that the game would ever have been very different at all from a result. Oregon was going to get blasted regardless. But if I will say this, if they found a way to keep being able to rely on the run game, I'm curious to see how many yards they could have gained against that Georgia defense, because it could have been maybe 200 yards, 180, 190 yards. I think there were yards to be had there. That was kind of proven all the way throughout the game. So a little bit of a digression there just to kind of provide some context for it. Obviously Oregon has had some success running against the best, and Eastern Washington didn't really prove much to me in terms of how it defended the run last game. So give me 300 yards on the ground for the Ducks.
I think that's a very reasonable prediction. If you just go and look through the scorebook from Tennessee State's game against Eastern Washington, 289 yards on the ground. I can imagine Oregon getting 11 more. And there are a bunch of explosive plays from Tennessee State too, just on the ground as well. But my prediction, I'm with Matt. I got over 500 yards of offense. I originally put down near 600, but I didn't really know what the difference was between over and near, so I just put over. I think it's the 300 yards for rushing, I think, is certainly in the question. I think Nix has a good day. I think that Oregon's receivers are actually going to gain separation. Plays are going to work, whether it's just a screen or something like that. Oregon's talent level is going to be just otherworldly compared to Eastern Washington. And I think Nix has a good day. I think he's got clear windows to throw the ball through. I think he's got receivers down the field. And I think this is a game where you could see a couple guys catch touchdowns. I think some combination is going to get near over 500 yards. I think 600 yards could be in contention, considering that Tennessee State put up, hold on, I have it on this page, 574 yards of offense. I think that Oregon can come close. Mind you, Eastern Washington was I just looked this up, a 22.5 favorite over Tennessee State last week. And they put, other than their 4 turnovers, that was an offensive clinic that they put on the Eagles.
Jared, why don't you pick 575 for the total yardage then? Why don't you just put it?
I'll set the line at 573.5, and I'll take the over. How about that?
Sure.
I'm not quite sure what to make of Eastern because we know the name, we know the history. There's a lot of respect given to it, but like Jared just went through, Tennessee State just kind of like mopped them, and they just had turnovers. Which, hey, credit to Eastern to forcing them, but I don't know that this game. Part of me says this game could be right around that 21-point spread. Part of me also thinks, as Jared just pointed out, like Oregon could just say, screw it, run the football and just demolish them. And
I mean, if they go ahead, man.
I was just gonna say it could just get really, really ugly.
Are you familiar with who their head coach is?
No.
He's a very famous former NFL player. Eddie George.
Oh, Big Ed.
For Tennessee State?
Yeah. Tennessee State's head coach is Eddie George. Sorry, I was just doing a little Tennessee State research.
I like that.
So
thank you.
The run game being good makes a little bit of sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
I was just going to say, if Oregon goes like full on Mario Cristobal here and just runs the ball 50 times, it could get interesting because Eastern Washington let up some big plays to Tennessee State on the ground. I keep getting confused. Eastern Tennessee, Georgia State. I'm all over the place right now.
All over the place. All right. Individual offensive player. Raise your hand if on the bingo card you had Sean Dollars leading Oregon in all-purpose yards in week 1 against Georgia. I certainly did not. No. But I will in week 2 against Eastern Washington. I think Dollars is going to go over 100 yards all-purpose. And I think normally you'd kind of scoff at that number, but with how Oregon is operating with its running backs, playing all 5 guys, everyone getting basically equal share of carries or snaps at running back, that's going to limit some of this all-purpose type stuff. So I'm going to go Dollars all-purpose over 100, which will lead the team in that category. I think he's going to be active in the run game, and he's also going to be active in the passing game as well.
We're not going to do our stock stuff until maybe after BYU, but did any of us buy Sean Dollar stock?
Ooh.
I don't remember.
I know I did. Jared, you didn't buy any running back stock. I remember that being a thing.
No.
I may have. I have my numbers somewhere.
I had no Whittington stock, and I think I initially looked at some Sean Dollar stock and changed it to more Terrence.
Oh, man, stock. I'm so upset. I had Bucky, Cardwell, Whittington, and James. And
you did everybody but him.
Here we go.
What I was going to say is that might have been the stock to buy because it was super buy low. And if he ends up kind of solidifying this job, which none of us really expected, we kind of all thought of him as maybe 3rd, maybe 4th. And again, I think it's hard to know at this point. I mean, he might. I don't think Matt's prediction is crazy at all. I think he's certainly capable of that. But like that's kind of a sneaky one because we were all on the Whittington Irving or I was on the Whittington bandwagon hype train. You guys were on the Irving hype train. I like Bucky quite a bit, as we'll get to my prediction in a moment. But yeah, Dollars is certainly somebody whose stock is up. Feels like it's kind of pointed in that direction right now from the running back room. I did a running back prediction as well because I had 300 yards rushing. So somebody's got to gain a lot of yards, and I'm going Bucky Irving, the first 100-yard rusher for Oregon this season. I think it's going to be by committee. I also am expecting maybe a big play here or there, and I think Irving's got a little big play potential. We didn't get to see much of it in the opener. Some fans were already making the decision that he shouldn't be playing very much, which I thought was interesting on the message board of like, he didn't show enough.
Fans overreacting? Shocking.
It's stunning. I should stop even, I guess, relaying some of the message board fodder stuff. But I think Irving's going to have a big day, and I expect 100 yards on the ground. Oregon's going to, I think, run pretty successfully. I think there'll be multiple guys that get over 50. But I think Irving will run for 100 yards. I have no idea, by the way, who will start. Irving started the opener. Dollars probably showed enough in the previous game to maybe get a starting nod, but I have no idea what this week of practice looked like. I have no idea. So we'll see on Saturday. I think that's going to be kind of a week by week who's a starter, unless somebody just comes out and absolutely takes ownership of it. But I've got Irving 100 yards on the ground.
Yeah, I got another running back one too, unsurprisingly here. I have Byron Cardwell leading the team in rushing, but not leading the team in the amount of carries. I think I looked at this, Eric, like you did, at the big play potential. And I think Cardwell has the best big play potential out of anybody on the roster in terms of running backs. You looked at how he did last week, 4 carries for 28 yards is 7 an average. He had the longest run of the day with 16 yards. Sean Dollars did lead the way with 33 yards on 4 carries. So his average was higher, but Byron Cardwell's longer was bigger. So I'm going with Cardwell in this instance. I think that he has a big play explosiveness factor that he showed last season against Colorado and at times during where Verdell went down and he stepped in. Eric, you mentioned like you don't know who's going to start. Had Irving start the first game. Cardwell, I think we all expected for most of the offseason was going to be the starter until all the transfers came. Could be a little chip on the shoulder here. I'm a big Byron Cardwell guy. I thought he was going to start no matter what this season, but I got a little chip on the shoulder for Cardwell here, and I think Oregon's offense goes run heavy, at least to start, and I think he has a couple explosive plays that put him in the driver's seat for leading the team and rushing on Saturday.
Cardwell was the 4th running back to enter against.
He was.
Yeah.
You talk about that chip on the shoulder. Yeah, I like it.
All right, team defense here. This is kind of a good and a bad scenario for Oregon.
Okay.
Eastern isn't going to go over 400 yards of total offense in this game. They're going to be somewhere in that 300s. Their run game is going to get bottled up. It wouldn't surprise me if they run for 50 yards, if even that, in this football game. But the bad here is I think Eastern's going to throw for 300. It's going to take a lot of throws to get there, but I think the Eagles are going to have some success throwing the football, and it's going to lead to Oregon's secondary giving up 300 yards or more. And quite honestly, post-game, it might be one of the bigger topics within the fan base, within the program of what's wrong with Oregon's secondary, and is it this big of a concern through 2 weeks?
I went positive here. Oregon didn't force a turnover against Georgia. Honestly, I can't think of a pass where they really had an opportunity to make one.
There wasn't.
I don't think there was, and I can't think of a run play where. Well, there was one where the ball did come out, and I think Bridges recovered it, but he was clearly down in the first half at some point. But the point is, I think they're going to be really aggressive in trying to force turnovers. Jared brought it up. That was a talking point going into week 1 is limiting your turnovers, but also forcing some. They lost that 2-0 in the opener. I think they're going to win this one. And I've got 3 forced turnovers against Eastern Washington. I mentioned it earlier. Eric Barrier was the equivalent of the Heisman Trophy winner at the FCS level. He won the Walter Payton Award at Eastern. He was their quarterback last year. He's gone. Gunnar Talkington is a senior. He's been around. This is his 5th year, but this is his first time starting, and this is going to be by far the best opponent he's played.
Oh, 100%.
I think he's going to have some difficulty here in terms of interpreting windows that look like they might have been open against Tennessee State might close. I think Oregon's secondary is a huge question mark, but athletically, Oregon has players out there that are just bigger, faster, stronger than what you're going to see against Tennessee State and, frankly, what you'll see in practice. So I expect there to be a stake or two there, and I expect him to throw a couple of interceptions, and I expect Oregon just to be really aggressive in trying to go after them and kind of creating game-changing plays. So give me 3 or more turnovers from an Oregon defense that badly needs to get stops, but also badly needs to make plays.
Yeah, the same outlook. This is a defense that needs to make plays in the secondary. This is a offense that will provide you opportunities to make plays in the secondary. I like just the skill set of turnover ability in the secondary for Oregon, whether it's Christian Gonzalez or Bennett Williams, Jamal Hill. They've all had big moments in turnovers and things like that, interceptions. So I have Oregon defense forcing 4 turnovers. So again, right on line with Eric there. I think it's just going to be more opportunities. And like Eric said, this is going to be – I just looked up Eastern Washington's schedule for the rest of the year. This will be the best team that Eastern Washington faces. I think it's going to bring a lot of surprise to Talkington at the time. I think there might not be too many opportunities to have turnovers just because I think they're going to go probably east to west a lot with like screen passes and end arounds, things like that. But I think when they go down the field – against Tennessee State, there's a lot of busted coverage, and that allowed them to have longer touchdown passes. But I think Oregon is going to be able to make up ground better than Tennessee State. They just have the better athletes. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities to make plays for Oregon's defense in the secondary. And I also think that Oregon's pass rush is going to get there at points. And I think it's going to potentially force, fumbles, things like that. And so I got 4 turnovers for Oregon's defense heading into Saturday.
You guys both brought this up, and I wanted to ask this question, especially after Erik brought up the turnovers in the secondary. Casey Rogers mentioned the importance for Oregon's defensive line to get their hands up and try and deflect some of these balls. How many of these interceptions that happen or these turnovers that happen in your eyes, let's set the over-under here, tipped passes by Oregon that leads to an interception at half a point? Do you think that happens, or is it purely the DBs making good plays?
You make a good point, though, in terms of Talkington's 5'10". He is not a very tall guy, and that's
short king.
He's a short quarterback. Oregon, I would guess, won't face. I mean, Stetson Bennett, also similar height. Oregon had that posed no problems. That didn't help Oregon at all. But I don't think under Talkington is Stetson Bennett. So I could see that. I'll take the over on that. I'll say maybe 1 interception off a deflection. I'll also say maybe it's a deflection at the second level too. Like maybe a linebacker, maybe a Noah Sewell jumps in and pops the ball in the air and they pick it that way. But I actually think that's a good point to bring up, because we haven't talked about what is a very clear weakness in theory for Talkington, which is 5'10". By the way, he's 5'10", 215 pounds. So short and very stout. That's a thick guy.
He could run too.
He's a good runner. He's a good athlete. I'll be interested to see how that translates against Oregon at the second level, where hopefully they're able to keep up with them. But I think they should be able to. But again, they struggled in that area last game. You just don't see a lot of 5'10", 215-pound quarterbacks, period, at this level. That's just kind of an anomaly.
Life is always too short to bet the under, so I'll take the over here of at least 1. Yeah, I mean, I could see that being a huge thing, because Georgia didn't, Oregon's defensive line didn't necessarily get the opportunities to put their hands up and try to deflect the ball, because a lot of it were short, quick out routes, whatever the case may be. I think, I watched a bunch of the tape for Eastern Washington. They do like to throw the ball down the field. And again, like Erik mentioned, 5'10" quarterback, a little bit of the Russell Wilson build where it can get swatted down at the line of scrimmage. I think that's a total, there's a big chance of that happening. Interceptions are pretty hard, because usually those tip passes go straight down, or someone just drops the ball, and that's why they're playing defense for the most part. But I'll take the over on this one. I like the opportunity here.
Yeah, just felt like that was something that we maybe needed to bring up as a possible game point here. All right, individual defensive pick. I felt like for Oregon, Jamal Hill led the defense with 11 total tackles, 9 being unassisted. And obviously I was on the big Justin Flo, Noah Sewell hype train. I thought Georgia would try and establish the run game and go at Oregon's interior, and they didn't. They went away from them. And so I'm flipping my lead tackle, and I'm going to go back to Jamal Hill. I think for the second week in a row, he leads the team in total tackles. I don't know if it's going to be 11 or even 10, but I just think with Eastern's desire to play on the perimeter, where Hill fits in within that defense, things are going to be going up for him in terms of opportunities to make tackles. 9 unassisted is a lot against Georgia, and I think he's gonna lead the team in total tackles, and he's gonna have a lot of those be unassisted as well in one-on-one situations.
We had very similar thought processes here, and I think Hill's a perfectly fine choice. I went Bennett Williams to lead the team in tackles and to create a new career high, which is previously 8. So I'm saying 9 or more. I actually didn't say lead the team. I just said 9 or more tackles. But I think that probably will be close, if not leading the team. I just think, I thought it was notable after a really tough loss who they chose to have address the media, which was Alex Forsyth and Bo Nix on offense. And your quarterback should always address the media. That should always be the case. But Forsyth being the center, being very much a captain, a leader of the offense, and then Bennett Williams being very much a leader of the defense. I thought that they handpicked people to go out there and take the tough questions and kind of fall on the sword, if you will. And so I think clearly Dan Tosh, this defense sees Bennett as one of the leaders. And I think he is going to go out and lead by example in this game, and he's going to play a really, really good game. He might be a player who has one of those turnovers or forces a couple. Last year, he was really effective in that regard in terms of I think he had 3 interceptions through 4 games before he broke his foot, sadly. I just look at him and say he knows this defense needs a bit of to be rejuvenated, to kind of have some new energy. And I think he's going to lead that. And I think he's going to play really, really well, play with his, with his hair on fire, if you will, and have 9 or more tackles for a new career high.
I didn't pick anybody to be leader. I just thought that Christian Gonzalez is going to show out. He's going to showcase why he's had all this preseason hype and has been, mocked in the first round of the 2023 mock drafts. I do have him getting 1 interception. I think he'll be part of one of the 4 turnovers that I predicted. I have the over at 6.5 tackles. I just think that Eastern Washington is going to, again, attack the perimeter and try to go east to west on Oregon because Georgia did so. I just don't think they're going to be nearly as successful. So I think Christian Gonzalez shows out. I think that Eastern Washington eventually will try to start throwing the ball down the field. And with his coverage skills and the lack of an elite talent at wide receiver that Eastern Washington has, I think he's going to show out and just have a really good game and just, again, showcase why there's been a lot of hype and buzz around him during the offseason.
I like the Gonzalez pick. I didn't think he necessarily played bad against Georgia, so I didn't quite understand the frustration with fans with him. But seeing him have a big game would probably go a long way as well, cooling the fan base. There's just a lot of overreactions from this guy sucks. Don't play him ever again.
Yeah,
there was a lot of that. It was pretty. I get it because fans are overreacting.
I mean, yeah, you lose 49-3 and it's not good, but come on, come on.
Agreed.
All right, let's go to the score predictions here. I have Oregon winning this game. I think Eastern is going to be a significant drop-off in team talent than what Oregon faced against Georgia. They are a veteran team. They bring back 31 players with starting experience. 258 combined starts is on the Eastern Washington roster. That's about 20 starts per position. That's quite a bit. So they are a veteran team here, but there's just a difference in programs here. Even though they've got the long history of winning big games, I just think Oregon is going to dominate in the trenches on both sides of the football, whether it's running the ball well against Eastern's defense or the defensive line kind of manhandling Eastern's offense. And I don't know if they're necessarily going to get a ton of sacks, but I think the ball is going to have to come out quicker than they would like, which could prevent 20-yard plays from happening, and instead it's a 5-yard play, a bunch of dink and dunks. I just think Oregon will get the stops. Eastern will be able to move the ball at times, will score at times. But midway through that third quarter, the game will kind of be over. The fourth quarter will kind of transcend into Oregon's backups playing while Eastern's working on getting their first unit some good reps and maybe punching in a late touchdown or adding a couple late field goals. So I have Oregon 51, Eastern Washington 24. Plenty to work on for Oregon, but plenty to be excited about and seeing marked improvement.
I like the prediction. Ours are close. I just, as an aside, I love the term dinks and dunks because if you say a bunch of dinks and dunks, it sounds like you're just being mean to the players. It's Washington, just a bunch of dinks and dunks. It sounds like a really like childish elementary insult, even though we all know that that's referring to short passing game. But I don't know. I just was laughing in my head about it, and I thought I'd share. Sorry, I'm delirious. I've been taking sleep medication for like 4 days and like trying my best to not be sick so I can cover this game on Saturday. We'll see. I have kind of similar thoughts here, and I do want to clear one thing up. I consider these bold predictions to be mutually exclusive from my game prediction. Like, I'm predicting these things happen. I'm not saying this is the game script that gets to this final score, because I saw a couple of folks on the message board be like, wait, if Oregon forces 3 turnovers and runs for 300 yards and it's like a 4-score game, that sounds surprising, because if it's if all those things happen, Oregon's going to win by like 50 points. I think those are outcomes that could happen. I'm predicting these are bold predictions. In terms of my game prediction, I think the game is probably a little closer than some fans would like, but I think it's also reasonable given what we just saw last week. So I have Oregon winning 45-21. I think it's going to be a rather competitive game at half. I think Oregon will be ahead. I think Eastern Washington will move the ball and score points in a way that Oregon fans won't love in the first half. I could see it being like 28-14, something like that, 31-14. But I think ultimately Oregon has the better athletes, has the better team, has a lot to prove. It's at home. The fans badly, badly need a win here. I kind of outlined a little bit of it. I do think there's an opportunity for Oregon to run the ball really effectively. I think this run game is going to be good throughout the season. I think the offensive line proved itself pretty well against what is some really elite athletes for Georgia last week. It's going to be a step down. I know Eastern Washington returns all its key defensive players. They've got a bunch of all Big Sky caliber players on their team. But I'm not trying to diminish who they've got. I'm just saying compared to Georgia, it's not quite the same level. And I think Oregon's offensive line is going to be really motivated to set the tempo up front. And I think they'll run it effectively, score some points. And I think it'll be a fairly high scoring game, though, because I do think Eastern will move it, like I said before. So Oregon wins 45-21. They avoid what would be just an absolute disaster of a start for the Dan Lanning era. If they go 0-2, it really opens the floodgates for fans to just could get ugly on Duck territory. Could the Duck
Lord.
the Duck
Please,
pond
Dan.
the Duck pond could be an absolutely terrible place to be for a very long time if they lose this game. So Ducks, please don't
for our sake.
Yeah, for to avoid a toxic work environment, please.
That's all we ask. I think we're all in line here. I got Oregon winning 48-21. I think Oregon's just going to be in control the entire game. I think Eastern Washington will have their moments. I think they might even score in the first drive, and everybody's going to think that the sky is falling. Which, assuming on the winds and how this should look in Eugene tomorrow, the sky might look like it's falling for a second. But yeah, I think Oregon's just going to ground and pound. I don't think it's going to be very fair on the offensive front for Oregon and their rushing attack. I think they're just going to have an easy day there. I think Bo Nix has a good performance. I think he's in control of the offense, makes a couple touchdown passes here and there. But yeah, I think Oregon certainly is the better team. I think they showcased that early. I think they score on their first drive with a great little, listed set of plays going right off a game script. I think that they just control it the entire way. I think that Eastern Washington probably, makes this, I don't know, I thought about saying 48-28, but I thought that they should cover the illegal spread, or not the spread that we use. So I have them winning 48-21, but I could see Eastern Washington punching in another touchdown at the end of the game when Oregon hopefully has their reserves in, which leads me to my next point. I think we get a Ty Thompson sighting in Eugene, Oregon on Saturday. So you can sound the alarms when he goes into the game. But I think Ty gets probably most of the fourth quarter an opportunity to either prove fans right or, prove the coaching staff correct. So we'll see what happens on that end.
That opens up a question here. What happens if, because this happened in Clemson on Monday night, DJ Ungalele led the win, but then the backup came in and went 4 of 6, but it looked really, really good.
Cade Klubnik.
Yeah. And I mean, Marcelo, even on Brandon Marcelo 24/7 Sports, has even said the change is coming. It's just when now, not if. Do we even, I mean, what would it take for both Bo Nix and Ty Thompson to have that even be brought up? And it be a legitimate discussion? Because look, Bo Nix could come out and he could go 18 of 25 for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns and no interceptions. And Ty Thompson could come out and go 6 for 6 for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I'm still saying Bo Nix is without a doubt the starting quarterback for Oregon. There's not even a discussion there. But if What's the level of inconsistency from Bo that opens this up if this happens and we see Ty?
Well, for starters, you need Ty to do better. You need Ty to perform against a non-FCS opponent.
Yeah.
Right. Just like Klubnik faced Georgia Tech, who's not a fantastic Power 5 program, but we talked about the roster talent at Eastern Washington in the 160s. I don't have the composite in front of me. Georgia Tech's probably in the 40 to 60 range, somewhere in there, right? Somewhere in that range, I would imagine. Doing it against a team like that, more impressive than going out against Eastern Washington and scoring some late touchdowns, in my opinion. So I think you need to see Ty do it against better competition for starters. And whether that, I don't know when he's going to get an opportunity. If he does, it would probably be on the heels of a really impressive game by Bo Nix, which means there's no way they're making the change. Or it would come on the heels of a game where they pull Bo Nix late just to give Ty an opportunity, which case would maybe give him which would give Ty that opportunity. So it doesn't happen this week, I think, regardless, unless Bo is just
bad.
He has to be just so
really,
bad.
really poor.
Like he's got to start. Right, he has to start kind of like I'm blanking on the name for the Boise State quarterback against Oregon State.
Hank Meyer.
There you go. Bachmeier. Hank Bachmeier.
Bachmeier, yeah.
That's what it was.
I like Hank Meyer, though. That's a good nickname.
Hank Meyer is good.
Well, his first name is Hank Bachmeier.
Hank Bachmeier. Yeah, you just forgot.
Good name, regardless.
One syllable.
Yes.
Unless you've got like 3 turnovers in the first 3 drives, and it's just like, holy cow, this sucks. Like, I just don't see Bo getting pulled against Eastern Washington. And I guess it would have to be just absolute worst case. And it's like they're down 21-0, and 2 of them are pick sixes, and Bo is just absolutely brutal. I think he's better than that. So I'd be very stunned.
Right.
He is.
I think if a quarterback change happens, frankly, it's going to happen in a similar manner to when Herbert replaced Prukop, which means you're into the season a little bit. Matt kind of laid this out on, I think it was our mailbag, where it's like, maybe you've lost 3 games already. A lot of your goals are kind of slipping away. You got the younger guy. The season's not going to play out. You just go with the younger guy, and you see, and maybe you give him a shot in a game you're losing to, like, hypothetically, maybe you've already lost 2 games or 3 games, and you're down to UCLA in the 4th quarter or the 3rd quarter, and you just go, Bo's playing bad. This is not good. We're open to making a change. I just don't see it happening for at least 4 or 5 games, unless this gets so untenable where they've lost to Eastern, they've lost to BYU, they lose. Like it would have to be an absolute shit show, for a lack of a better word. So I think the leash for Bo is longer than what some fans would like it to be, but I think that's deserved, because I genuinely, if you objectively go back and watch the game against Georgia, a couple really bad decisions. I'm not saying he was perfect, not saying all the throws were great. I didn't think he got helped out very much at all by his receivers. Bucky Irving dropped a couple, or had a couple at least hit his hands he could have caught. And for the most part, Oregon receivers weren't running open. I mean, the throw to Chase Cota was terrible, where he just kind of let him out to dry, and that ball needs to be thrown to the sideline, not to the middle of the field. So I'm not going to excuse that. But there's a lot there where it's like, I don't know. I think fans are really overreacting to how he performed.
The throw to Cota was such an obvious mistake, because that was like the one of 3 passes where Nix actually had a window to throw the ball to.
Yeah,
true.
So, and again, give a bunch of credit to Georgia's defense, because they're absolute animals. But to kind of draw a comparison to the Clemson situation, DJ Uiagalelei, he comes out and replaces Trevor Lawrence against BC, Boston College, and Notre Dame, does extremely well. Everybody looks at him like the second coming of Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson, whoever they had. And last season, he leads the ACC in turnovers, in both interception and fumbles, and doesn't have a really good grasp at the offense. They lose their offensive coordinator. They get a new one who's been with the program. And so the goal was that if the Clemson offensive line was better for DJ, then he would be better. And I don't know if you guys watched this Georgia Tech game, as this loud car is going by my apartment right now. I don't know if you watched the Georgia Tech and Clemson game, but it was disaster city for the first 2 quarters. And then Clemson finally pulled away. And, DJ had already had a fumble. He didn't really showcase that he had a grasp of the offense. And the other thing is that, excuse me, Cade Klubnik had already also got rave remarks from the team, was a 5-star freshman coming in. It was not a guarantee that he would be good if he was put into a game, but everybody was talking very fondly of him and saying that this guy was the next dude at Clemson. And for as much as fans kind of forget this, we haven't heard any of that from Oregon's camp. And Matt, I think you brought it up maybe on the Mailbag podcast as well, where players were asked about Dakota Prukop, and they would say, yeah, whatever, he's good. They would just rave about Justin Herbert. We haven't seen that or heard that from Ty Thompson like Clemson has from Cade Klubnik as their backup quarterback. So, and I'm like Eric, it would take an absolute disaster of a performance of Bo Nix against maybe Eastern Washington, maybe BYU, maybe Washington, whoever it is, for Ty to really get into the game. And you got to give Bo some opportunity to showcase himself here because, again, if you look at who is going to play this Georgia team all season long, unless you're Bryce Young or a potential Heisman winner, I don't think you're going to be doing too well. And unless there's some extreme mishap on Georgia's defense during the season, which I don't expect. I mean, that is a tough competition to go against in your first game for your new team. So again, we're going to pump the brakes on the Ty Thompson starting again. I do think he'll come into the game only because Nix has put the team ahead by 4 scores, and that there's going to be an opportunity for him to just go out there and throw some footballs to people.
That's exactly why I wanted to bring up that question, just because if we do see Ty like Jared thinks, there's going to be some unjustified comments that he needs to be the starter, no matter what he really does in this game. And I just don't think it's worth. It's not. You can't judge this performance whether we need the best case scenario from Ty and the absolute worst case scenario from Bo to even have this conversation. And so preface your expectations with that in mind as this game plays out. And if we even do see Ty in this football game, which I hope we do, I hope we see all 3 quarterbacks, because that means this game is no longer in doubt. Go ahead, Eric.
I just had one thing. Sorry, I know
one
we're
more
trying
thing,
to
baby.
The last thing. I just wanted to point out that last year against Stony Brook in the second half, Ty Thompson 6 for 9, 82 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's an FCS opponent. In games against FBS opponents, Pac-12 opponents, he was 1 for 6 with 5 yards and an interception. So my point is, let's not make too much out of what he does this weekend against an FCS opponent in Eastern Washington. If he comes out and is awesome, that's great news. So that means he looks the part. That's what you'd like him to do in this instance. But let's not go, he needs to start, because he hasn't proven against a Power 5 opponent that he can. I mean, he was 1 for 6 for 5 yards and an interception last year in two showings against Arizona and Colorado. So small sample size, but you need to see him do it against a Pac-12 opponent before you go, wow, he was great against Eastern Washington, he needs to start. I just think that sort of context also needs to be in place before just going into the game, because I think fans will, if he does come in and he does play really well, there will be a contention that go, he's got to start him against BYU. Mm-hmm. Not so fast, to quote a legend who's kind of losing his role on College Game Day.
Yeah, one more thing just to finish it off. And it's not that we don't want Ty to perform well. I would love to see Ty to get out there on the field and go 11 for 16 with 150 yards and 3 touchdowns. That would be great, because it might actually spark something where he just figures it out. And we all know Ty Thompson's God-given talent with his arm and his ability to run. It's just all the same thing, just like a lot of younger quarterbacks, is just reading defenses. If something clicks in this game and it begins to click in practice, it might begin to click in the minds of Dan Lanning and Kenny Dillingham. So I hope we see Ty on the field. Just like Eric said, you just got to temper your expectations against going an FCS opponent compared to an FBS team and Eastern Washington. And if you went against BYU or even just Wazoo or anybody else in the Pac-12, there's just such a vast difference in talent disparity. So, again, I'm predicting you see him, but only because Bo Nix and the offense, the first team offense, has put them in such a good position that they are able to just throw anybody out there and say, let's see what you got, kid.
All right, one more thing.
Let's go.
We're wrapping up the show.
Boo. Boo. Hiss.
All right, that's going to do it for us here on this prediction podcast for Odds and Audibles and DuckTerritory.com. Next time you guys will hear us, it will be coming from Autzen Stadium or maybe from our homes after the game from Autzen Stadiam as Oregon takes on Eastern Washington Saturday night. Go to DuckTerritory.com for more coverage throughout Friday, Saturday, and into Sunday leading up to, during, and after Oregon versus Eastern Washington. 5:30 kick. See you there.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.